Welcome to the C45 Association's official YouTube channel. The following presentation is brought to you with support from Sigma Analytical Services with the C45 Association. Sigma Analytical is the only cannabis lab with cross-continental operations in the world and the first cannabis-focused GMP certified lab in Canada. Our service goes beyond a full panel of testing and also covers stability studies, cleaning validation, formulation and product development support, and more. We have been a front runner in testing Cannabis 2.0 products and have validated methods for vape cartridges and a variety of edibles, topicals, and beverages. Sigma is also Shoppers Drug Mart's partner in medical cannabis by Shoppers and Ecolab's exclusive partner in Canada and South America to run cleaning validation studies for cannabis processors and producers. Our short and dependable turnaround times, in addition to accurate and reliable results and outstanding client support, has made Sigma the preferred lab for many LPs. Sigma also offers support on consulting projects for the producers and labs in Canada, Colombia, the US, and beyond. From method development, validation, and transfer, to support for designing, setting up, and running in-house or independent cannabis labs. For any questions or to start a discussion on how we can assist you, please don't hesitate to contact us. We hope you enjoy the following presentation, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel for more quality content.
All right, we're going to move into the vendor qualification panel and have a chat around supply chain vendor qualification. This is critical as we're going to look at raw material to processor to final product. And a lot has changed over the last few years in the cannabis industry, and we have some incredibly smart people with us today. Some faces you'll recognize, and some a new face to many of us that is doing some great work out in the industry. On the panel today, we've got John Simon, Mei Ding, and Karina Lanikoski. Oh my goodness, Karina, I have screwed your name up for 4 years. I'm surprised you don't smack me around more. We're going to start today. Welcome, everybody. We're going to start today with a bit of a framing statement, if you will. So I'm going to let each of my panelists introduce themselves, their background a bit more, and where they're from, why they're here. And then I would like you, as we move through, just to help us frame the conversation around what is changing in the cannabis space around vendor qualification. And it certainly in my work, when we look at business strategy and business risk, is becoming much more critical. I don't know, criticality is always one of those strange measuring scales that either is or it isn't, but it has been the downfall in a lot of files that many of us are working on. So I wouldn't mind, once you've introduced yourself, just help frame how important this is and why considering the points we're going to look at today are so important. We're going to start in alphabetical order, and we're going to put the newest face, I think, to many of you. We've had a chance to chat a few times, and I love her already. Mei Ding from IVIC. If you could let us know a little bit about yourself and then help frame this.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Mei, and I've been in the pharmaceutical industry since 2004 in regulatory affairs and quality assurance. And in the last 2 years, I moved into cannabis. So I'm loving being in this space. There's a lot to learn, and there's a lot that you can take from pharma and move into the cannabis industry to really get organizations to have the internal structure that's established in the pharmaceutical industry and bring that forward so that you can have all the regulatory compliance pieces that is being required by the regulators. So to answer your question, Barry, why do we need vendor qualifications? You'll very quickly see as an organization that if you don't have it, you will be faced with certain issues and problems that could have been mitigated had you had a better understanding of the organization that you're partnering with. And so vendor qualification is, in the pharma world, it is a GMP requirement, and it helps, establish your your understanding and expectation of the other organization, and also it lays out the standards that you of the businesses that you want to partner, and therefore will help you in the future with mitigating a lot of issues that arise, or if it does arise, it'll help you with having a better discussion, because some of the initial pieces have been talked about from the onboarding process.
Well, thank you so much, May. I know we're going to get deep into this. I'm looking forward to this. To me, vendor qualification is a critical piece of just their business fundamentals, whether it's cannabis business or not. Now we're going to move over to a face very familiar to many of us. Karina, you probably should tell some of the people where you're from, for those that don't know you, and expand on this for me, please.
Thanks, Barry. So my name is Karina Lanikoski. I'm a partner in Deloitte's risk advisory practice. And my focus is on regulatory and compliance and scaling operations in the cannabis sector. Prior to Deloitte, I was Vice President of Quality and Regulatory at Cannabis Compliance, Inc., up until we were acquired by Deloitte. So I've been in the cannabis space for 4 years now, and I have about 20 years of experience in regulated industries. So I too come from a pharma background, medical device, excuse me, and ISO 1345 background as well. And over the last 4 years, I've really seen the cannabis industry start to bring a lot of the regulated spaces, practices like those from pharma into cannabis, and really use those to build their best practices and quality management systems. So that's what I do for a lot of what I do with Deloitte. I agree with everyone here. I mean, vendor qualification has become extremely critical in this space. And I like to step back and look at what's changed in the industry to make it so critical. So if you think back to legalization 2.5 years ago, the industry was completely different. So it used to be that all cannabis companies were vertically integrated. They performed all the functions from seed to sale, literally seed to sale to their patients. But when 2018 rolled around, all those new license types were introduced, which allowed companies to specialize. So we saw extraction companies come online. We saw micro cultivators get licensed. We saw white labelers come into existence. And we are now seeing players look into their operation and decide, okay, what am I good at and what am I going to outsource? And same thing, over those 2 years, we also had 600 new licensed participants come into the market. So for our supply chain, this means that the landscape we have today is completely unlike the landscape we had 2 years ago. The number of transactions and movements of materials and product in the industry has expanded exponentially. So today, a license holder isn't just depending on themselves from seed to sale. They're now dependent on, yes, the typical input vendors like raw materials and packaging supplies, but often you're seeing companies depending on each other for supplying dried flower, for extracts as inputs, and of course for critical services like irradiation and testing. And that just wasn't the case 2 years ago. So you're layering all this change, this fast change, into an industry that's historically a little bit secretive and doesn't have that much transparency. So we know our supply chains have a lot of risk and a lot of unknowns, and they're very complex. So it's natural that because of that, a vendor qualification should be one of the most critical programs you have right now. If you didn't start off with a strong program, you're going to find cracks. We're starting to see the cracks in the supply chains now. And hopefully you're not encountering those cracks when something goes wrong, because then you may be in the middle of a dispute or a major quality issue while you're trying to figure out your vendor qualification program. So having that proactive vendor qualification program is just your way to manage risk in your supply chain. And it's more critical than ever before because, like I said, the complexity has gone from almost zero to complete disruption. And when the world opens up and we go global, it's going to get even more complex. So it's time to get ready now.
That's excellent. I'm making so many notes here that, and again, I know that all four of us spend a lot of time working with companies to try to help them understand risk. And I am loving this conversation. We may blow times out of this. We're going to go over to another expert in the field, and I have no reservation saying that, John Simon with Q&R, who certainly based on my knowledge of his work, spends an awful lot of time helping companies after they haven't taken this into consideration, as well as helping them set up to do it right. So I think, John, welcome, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Thank you. Yeah, John Simon. So my background, I help companies get site licenses and product licenses, so medical devices, drugs, natural health products, cannabis, controlled substances. So, I just to echo what's already been said, a lot of what we're trying to do with vendor qualification is to support the good business practices. So good manufacturing practices are good business practices that are codified. So we're just trying to create these tools so companies can work together to try and prevent a situation where there's a disconnect in expectations as the product moves through the supply chain and goes from one license holder to another. So a lot of our work in that vendor qualification process is to make sure that it's a good quality product that we're getting. We often say the process is the product. So we can't test something into compliance, but we need to know that the processes at one facility are under control so that when it gets transferred to another facility within that supply chain, that we have that same high level expectation of meeting the specifications and complying with the process that we have.
We're gonna lean in a little bit then, because it strikes me that, as we know, there's not a lot of direct guidance around vendor qualification or even risk, actually. I mean, the people that do this well have experience in the field, they have education in the field, but every case, I know in my realm, it's important that every case is looked at in the context of what they're aiming for. I mean, I'm sure for all of you, you can work on the same product or the same path, and there's going to be nuances to that make you have to get creative and make it work properly. So can you, I want to say, articulate or quantify what the expectation of a cannabis firm would be in terms of implementing a program like that? And is there a difference? In the security world, we have people that aim for just pass the regulatory line, or aiming to do it properly as a best practice, a business best practices, or a GPP realm. What should the expectation be? I know that's a flowery, loaded question, because we'd all like to be aiming higher, but what is the expectation for a cannabis firm in terms of implementing a vendor qualification program? And we'll go backwards this time. So John, I'll put you on the hot seat to start.
Great. Yeah, it's one of the questions that we get asked all the time is, how far do we have to go? Do we have to, it's like the dentists say, you just have to brush the teeth you want to keep. So if you're just going to go for the minimum, you're going to end up with problems. You're going to end up with complaints. You're going to end up with recalls, and that's more work in the long run. So trying to convince a client that you have to go past that minimum in order to assure that you're not going to have the complaints, and you're going to protect the public health and make sure that that the products that you're delivering to the market are safe and effective. Those are conversations we have all the time. We can usually back it up with just product that's on the market, complaints that are out. People know that there's some products that are better than others. So if they can align themselves with the products that are successful in the market and don't have the complaints and don't have the problems, they'll see that pathway to making sure that we're going beyond the minimum. In the States, they say, in God we trust, and everybody else should write it down. So that's something the FDA says. It's just everything should be documented. Everything should be clear and makes your business easier if everything's written down and clear.
Yeah, it is amazing I'm still shocked at how many businesses that have, if not millions, hundreds of thousands of dollars behind them that don't have even simple SOPs on paper somewhere. Over to you, Karina, on this. This is a biggie, and I know that I've learned a lot in the past from talking to you about this. So how do we actually frame this?
Yeah, so John, you're talking a little bit about, the risk tolerance of the company and how much they want to do. And it's a tough one, because when the regulations don't specifically state, like, you must have this, a lot of companies are just going to think, oh, it's a gray area. I don't need it until, I have to have it, or Health Canada tells me to have it. But I would argue the same as John, like you need to think of it a different way. There are things in the regulations that imply that you should have this program in place. So, it's pretty clear that license holders have to demonstrate that cannabis has been produced and distributed in accordance with the regs. We know the QAP has to have enough information and review the documentation to release the batch, showing that the batch has been produced and packaged according to the regs and tested according to the regs. And then there's this other hint in the guide where your hazards, as they pertain to suppliers, need to be understood as an input into your preventive control plan, your PCP. So you obviously need to have a certain amount of information on hand to qualify that the material is good, the supplier is good, and the level of risk it poses to your product is acceptable to you. So unless you have that written out in a program somehow, how are you going to be able to demonstrate that you've looked at it, that you know what your risks are, and that you have them under control? So like one example would be like, how do you know that the supplier isn't going to swap out that material on you and give you something with a slightly different specification? If that material is critical in your PCP, you need to have that under control. So all those little things, it doesn't say you have to have a program, but I don't think you can do all those things. And I don't think the QAP can really release that batch without understanding that their inputs are under control. So that would be my argument. I mean, you can argue the other way and say, oh, I know it's good, or it's just, it's just soil. But you have to really think about all the things that soil can do to your plant, which can affect your heavy metals results, and where those inputs actually come to outputs that matter to the product quality. So in a nutshell, I would say the requirement is to understand your supply chain, know where your risks are, and impose an appropriate level of control that assures that GPP is met. And to have that, you have to have a program, because otherwise you can't demonstrate that you did your due diligence.
You guys you've got so many questions now flooding my head that I'm going to hit you with. You're in trouble later. May obviously around that framing too, but can you also talk about how deep into that supply chain, and we'll circle back too, but I know in other industries we have to go fairly deep in the supply chain, and the pandemic has certainly taught us that 1 or 2 deep is not always enough on a critical piece. Where would you go with that, May?
Yeah, so I come from pharma, so echoing John and everyone who's part of this panel, you need to have a program in place, and that pharma goes down all the way to even like a third party subcontractor, and having at least awareness that the third party that you're partnering with, if they do outsource some of their activities, that you're aware of it and that you have that in your paperworks, and that they've done their due diligence in onboarding third party, right? Because it all falls back to you as the product owner. When I first came on board, I had onboarding checklists for new vendors. I had an audit checklist. I had SOPs and even a quality assurance agreement. And the industry was very scared to see some of the documentations I had, but more and more so, they're moving towards that. And I've had, especially if you're going to subcontract manufacturing and having a third party do the bulk of your work, your product's representation, right? If you're going to have that, you really need to vet this facility. You need to vet that not only do they have the certifications and the inspections required, but that if there is a problem, what the responsibilities are, that you're going to be notified, that you're going to be part of that solutioning, and it's not going to all take place without you being privy to this information. And so John, you had asked, Barry, you had asked about how deep do you go into. I would go as deep as establishing an agreement that spells out the different partners' responsibilities and the different partners' handling of situations when it doesn't work, because that's, by laying it all out front, it helps you to later on defer to some of these processes that may not be in place in a more younger industry like cannabis.
Mhm. So, yeah, go ahead, John.
Yeah, I've got I agree 100%. And sometimes what we have is we have a supply agreement and then a quality agreement. So that, that quality agreement can be a table to say, this is who's responsible for what. And so I get this all the time where people say, you can grow this stuff outside. We've been doing this for thousands of years, but our standard under the cannabis regulations is a pharmaceutical standard. So we have to follow those rules. So just because you were able to do it for the last 20 years, or you didn't get caught, or you didn't, and like with some of the license holders that are out there right now that don't have SOPs, batch records, specifications, some of these still need to get up to that level. That doesn't make it right. I try to tell my clients, well, whose name is on the package? So if your name is on that package and that's going into the dispensary, then you're responsible. You've got that liability that you take, and making sure that you've controlled that supply chain to get to that product on the shelf.
Did you have something, Karina? I wasn't sure if I saw you.
Oh, I can just add on about that quality agreement. I think that's the number one document that's missing in the industry right now. Industry is still largely relying on supply agreements, and they might have some quality terms in there, things that like legal is used to addressing, but they definitely don't address all the quality and GPP roles and responsibilities through the supply chain. And like they said, if it's not clear who's doing what, you're at risk, and you're probably going to find out that you're at risk during a dispute. So there's going to be a quality issue. And then you're going to have to resolve not only the issue, but the roles and responsibilities during the issue, which can be very awkward.
So I'm going to put all three of you in a dangerous position, since all four of us are consultants. But it begs the question, I guess, that and I love your comment, John, around whose name is on the package. So with what feels like a significant move, you spoke a little bit about it, Karina, to separating processes. Like we have a lot more companies out there white labeling for many suppliers, and that type of expansion in the industry. Have you seen issues? I know certainly don't want anyone naming names, but are we seeing some dangerous trends that as risk professionals, it's tough to sell prevention, right? I mean, educating people and helping them understand their risk tolerance could be a tough thing until something goes wrong. Do you feel like we're sort of destined toward a bit bigger boom than the small ones we've seen along the way? Does it feel that way? I wouldn't mind your input on that. May, I'll start with you on this one. If you're what you're seeing as relative, you say you're new, but new is very fast in this industry. So you're part of the family now. But what's your feelings around that? Are we aiming for some catastrophic failures there?
I think it's a learning process, and even with the organizations that I'm honored to be a part of. They weren't on, when they saw some of these SOPs or agreements, they weren't totally on board, and they were afraid to scare other individuals in this industry. But the truth is that when a problem arises, and that's when these discussion takes place, and that's when they pull me in the most. Right. So I think, people learn along the way, and by having some of these discussions up front, they see the need for why pharma had all this in place, and now they're integrating some of these structures. So I just see it as kind of an evolving process that becomes part of what everyone is doing, because they encounter problems otherwise.
It is. It's interesting you said evolving. For many of us, we are, well, certainly for myself and the team I work with, are feeling better about the evolution of who's making decisions in many of these organizations, because there's a little bit less passion. I'll probably get slammed again on social media, but a little less passion and a lot more business lens to actually think about where those next steps are. Karina, your thoughts around that? Are we aiming towards, do we think we're going to see a problem? Because it's a big problem beyond what we're seeing on little ones.
Yeah, I hate to be Chicken Little, but yeah, I do think something is looming out there. And there's a number of factors that make me say that, because of the change in the industry, which I already described. But I add on to that COVID and the lack of transparency, the remote inspections, the inability to go visit sites and tour them and, have those relationships and make sure your QAP can do audits. Most of that isn't happening right now. So even over the last, it's only been 13 months of COVID, a lot of players have come on, they're establishing those relationships, and they're not having that external oversight that they could otherwise have. So if you have a weak vendor qualification program, which we know a lot of companies do, it's just a lot of risk sitting out there in the industry. And something is bound to happen. We've seen the stories happen in other regulated industries. I mean, pharmaceuticals has so many stories about supply chain failures, actually with issues getting to consumers. So I hope it doesn't happen, but I do feel that sort of impending doom that something could happen.
I'm glad I'm not the only Chicken Little out there. John, I know that you touch a lot of this, but I wouldn't mind also expanding a little bit, because it's a lot. I'm sure you agree with what you're hearing. But adding to that, what happens as we see these companies moving more and more towards looking outside our borders? I mean, I've been talking with a bunch of micros for the last 2 weeks, and I'm refreshed, but also cautious, because the first thing out of their mouth is, and we've all heard it, they want to be the best, newest, greatest craft and export. And that's, again, to what we're talking about, that's a bigger boom if that goes south.
And those are great opportunities. When we talk about the price per gram, you're getting up to like the $15, $20 per gram, intra-industry $3 per gram, to the dispensaries $6 per gram, $8 per gram. So if you can get to those numbers, that's great. But with that is an expectation that everything is more transparent. So everything is set up and documented, and it's very easy as you have multiple inspections to get through that process. But I agree with what Mei Dang and Karina were saying. We could be in for a problem. The good news is that the companies, everybody's trying to get to that sales license, or the ones who are, they're realizing that, okay, when my name goes on the package, I better be careful, because I've seen a lot of companies in the supply chain say, well, it's not my name on the package, so if they're going to buy it, buyer beware. And that's really not the culture that we're trying to establish in the industry, where somebody gets stuck with a product that isn't good because, hey, you're the license holder, I'm just the brand developer, or I'm just a piece in this chain. So we've got to be careful not to hurt the whole industry, because it affects everybody when we get recalls, when we have complaints, when we have a reputation for not having a good product. But I normally see this as a progression. As people get closer to getting their own sales license, they start to get more concerned about those supply agreements, quality agreements, vendor qualification, making sure that they have those pieces in place. And if they don't, they're gonna face those when they market the product and they have complaints and recalls and more work. Like every complaint, I don't know if Mei Dang and Karina would agree, but I would say every complaint is 1 to 4 hours of work for the QAP. So if you start stacking up complaints, you stack up additional work and logging and trending, and it gets really complicated really fast.
Well, and all of you said it at one point or another. The other piece it's a bit of an intangible, you can't put a dollar sign to it, but that reputational risk in such a young industry, especially if you're trying to expand outside of your region. Again, I'm thinking of micros, but the big boys too. you almost can't put a dollar value to if something goes south and you have a government that decides you're not coming into their country or something like that. It can really be very dangerous. So I want to sort of wrap up, I guess, with a last question. And obviously, transparency is critical. We've talked about that a lot, and how we're actually putting a program in place and making sure that it is being monitored properly. And I'm going to add, by the right eyes. You do need to have people that understand what they're looking for and understand where the business is going. But what would you say are, we'll pick a number, the top 2 or 3 most overlooked elements in a vendor risk program that you've run across that people need to be aware of, and even after today, just go back and make sure they're addressed? John, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I got one that I've come across quite recently is just whenever all licenses are issued with 2 conditions, that there's mandatory pesticide testing and then there's a limit on sales. One of the confusing parts are that the processor, so if an extraction company is going to extract cannabis, they're supposed to test that cannabis for pesticides before they start the process. So there is some confusion in the industry, and I've seen it at multiple places where the extractor says, well, we've acquired the flower from somebody else, and we're going to test the pesticides at the end of our process, so we don't need to test the raw materials. And that's some confusion where we need to make sure that those products are tested before you start your extraction process. And then it does get difficult in that supply chain, because if you're now telling somebody, hey, you've used 4 different lots of dried flower to make one extract, can you trace back and find all that the testing data to prove it? It gets really complicated, and it's harder and harder as time goes by to find that information. But it is a requirement that we test the input material prior to processing. So I see that as a big issue. It's going to be simple to fix. We're just going to have to be tighter on collecting that testing data. That being said, yeah, I'm quite optimistic, because there's, it's all about is it a representative sample? Is there uniformity? Those are all issues that we're dealing with now. But there is an amount of trust that you have in that supply chain. So you have to do business with trusted vendors.
I went to school to learn to be a pessimist about humanity. So when you say trust, I always think it's only good until it breaks the first time.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
May, your thoughts on that? What are if you could pick 1 or 2 elements most often overlooked that you've seen that people could walk away and make sure they have in place in their risk program?
Yeah, what I see is whenever you're onboarding another vendor or outsourcing an activity, it's always good to understand their ability to recall. And that seed to sale traceability that John had mentioned, that you trust that they may have this program in place, but you need to understand what that looks like, because you're going to be most implicated with this business partner when something critical like this happens. And so that's kind of like the worst case scenario. So that's one of the programs that when I'm onboarding a new vendor, that I look at to understand their process and to understand the procedures and internal procedures that they have, so that there is that connection of, can we get the information that we need so that we can have that, seed to sale traceability and pull, specific batches as needed in a recall, because that's your worst case scenario. So preparing for those scenarios. I think it's also good to understand training programs, because you may have certain individuals designated as QAP, but who else is handling and involved in the processing of your products, and what training and qualifications have they what programs have they put in place to demonstrate that they've had the training and qualifications in order to be a part of that process. And so that's a second area that I feel is not as stringent or not as in place when you compare it to more established organizations. The last is cleaning. I attended a really good webinar on cleaning of cannabis, and it's not easy. It's not easy to clean it. There's certain programs that are in place, and everyone's learning on the spot. And so just to understand that protocol and whether or not there are residue testing as part of trying to understand if there's any residuals that are that are going to reside with your products in your finished product. And so understanding how cleaning is taking place at the facility and how that impacts your product. So in summary, I would say recall, training, and cleaning, they're not an exclusive 3 item, but they're the items I feel that can be overlooked in this industry.
Nice. It always strikes me, and in educating clients around risk tolerance and risk programs, I always try to point out to them how often in a risk program, and the 3 you just talked about are great examples of that, a failure in any one of them can cascade into a catastrophic failure. Unlike other operational programs where you can usually make up for it somehow. Karina, I've sort of left you till last year to throw in your thoughts and add to this. What are you seeing? What do you see people missing? What?
Yeah, I have a couple. I'll give you. My first one's a little different. I'm going to say for my first one, a lot of the programs I see just are not usable or functional for the company itself. So it's not maybe a program that requires every vendor to be reviewed in a certain way that might be overkill or underkill for what the material or input actually is. So make sure that program is risk-based and that you're doing the amount of work that you need to do for what you're sourcing. Otherwise, you're going to have a program on the shelf. You won't be using it as you should. And if you're not following your SOP, you're not compliant. And you also want to make sure that your quality management program lets your company be agile and manage change. It can't be a bottleneck to make changes when you need to make changes. So make sure that program works for you, works for your company, and also assesses the risk of your suppliers and vendors, because both of those things are important to work together. The other one I say is a little bit different, more applicable to labs, because we have seen a lot of articles and such about the issue of lab shopping, right? So that's, I get a result and I don't like it, so I'm going to send that to another lab and see if I get a better result. But the industry needs to take a role in eliminating and not perpetuating this issue. So when you're working with qualifying your labs, I think there needs to be agreements in place to make sure that you're getting a true test result, that the sample submitted, the sample preparation, the test methodology, and the quality practices of the lab all work together to get a true result. And I would therefore ask that license holders include in their supplier program a review of the data integrity programs for those labs, and make sure the questions are asked, who has the authorization to invalidate a test result, and have that in your agreement. What is required in case of an out of spec or out of trend, and who is authorized to actually invalidate that result, because invalidation is happening in the industry with no justification. And if we had this put into our vendor qualification and quality agreements, it wouldn't be a problem, but it's still a problem and it should be embedded in this program.
Excellent points. And I certainly close to home for me is I know we've all heard this, the buying SOPs and buying off the shelf templated procedures is a dangerous thing. I mean, all of us work from the knowledge we have, but I don't think any of us have ever slapped a template down and said, here's your SOPs. It really has to fit that organization and fit the outcomes they're looking for. We'll do a last roundtable before we roll into Q&A. And this is your chance, without Barry getting in the way and giving you a specific something. But what do you see? I love the fact that that we are seeing, often from pharma, but we are seeing systems moving in a little more comfortably into our industry, in the cannabis industry, and people being aware of that. Where do you, we talked about the potential for a big boom, if you will. I had this in my head as a whole sentence, and I've now managed to entirely turn myself inside out. Let's simply recover from that and let Barry just go hide in a corner. Let's just do a last wrap up with anything else you'd like to share before we wrap the panel up. We'll start with May, and I'm just going to go hide over here for a minute while you wrap us up for a minute or two, May, and then we'll just circle around the panel.
I get questions from people who ask me about U.S. CMOs, because now everybody wants to move into the U.S. And their questions are, different facilities claim that they're a GMP. How do they know, and how do they validate that the facility is indeed GMP prior to onboarding, the facility as a business partner? And one of the things that I share back is, you're able to ask for recent inspection reports. You're able to ask for certifications, and you're able to get, if they are FDA licensed in the U.S., to get that license number. If they're registered, and if they're a facility in Canada, to get that Health Canada license number. This is all part of you onboarding and vetting and trusting and getting an understanding of the organization that you're going to be working with. So these are important things to have. It's also, you're able to ask for SOPs, critical SOPs, ask for it. That way you can review it. That way you can understand the internal process in place of that organization. It's also important to do a virtual audit. As Karina had shared back, like now, we are limited during this pandemic, but you are able to have a virtual audit. You are able to have, deeper dive discussions with different team members of an organization before you onboard them. And most importantly, to establish a QAA, quality assurance agreement, to lay out the responsibility and expectations between the two organizations. This is kind of the recommendation and the final takeaway that I'd like to share back to you.
Thank you so much for that, May. Karina, you're just piling on, and for wrap up here, but we didn't go down the path because I didn't think we'd have time, but looking to the US and Europe, we're playing in Europe more. What's your thoughts there, and how do you protect yourself with that?
Yeah, from a vendor qualification and supply chain perspective, it's really about becoming a strong player in the industry. So the number of suppliers has increased exponentially. At some point, there's going to be supplier rationalization, not just for the provinces, but for anywhere that's being supplied. And you need to be a player that is strong and that has a strong supply chain yourself. So this is one program that can set you up to be those suppliers. So if you are setting up your vendor qualification program to be a future supplier to the US, to Europe, or to other markets that we can't even crystal ball yet, you need to have this program in place. It needs to be agile. You need to be able to adjust it as the quality requirements change over time. And I would just add to the point about trust in the supply chain. Trust is very important, but in GMP we usually say trust but verify. So whatever you are trusting, make sure you've actually verified it for yourself, so that you have that documentation and the assurance that you're getting what you paid for.
Very nice. Yeah, I trust is always, we can add some qualifier after it at almost every industry we all work in. John, over to you to wrap. And again, I know you touch a lot of international clients as well. So your thoughts there?
Yeah, just to echo what Maydang and Karina have already said, it's trust and verify. If somebody shows you a certificate and says, yeah, we're GMP certified, you've got to take another look. You've got to make sure that that company can still work with you and work with your company and your procedures and your process, because just because they have a flashy certificate that may have been issued a couple of years ago or more, that they may not be currently compliant. So it's definitely always a good idea to do that audit to get your to get the questionnaire out there at a minimum. We usually start with the vendor questionnaire, then we escalate it to an audit depending on how critical that vendor is. But one of the things that I do caution people is just not to be so gullible. So often somebody will come to a client and say, "Oh, I've got this new supplement or new nutrient that's gonna save everything," and then we find out later that it has a pesticide in it, or it's either adulterated or misbranded. It has an undeclared pesticide or an ingredient that isn't allowed. So we just got to be really careful and pick your vendors cautiously, because there are a lot of companies that mean well but may not understand the standard that we're operating under, especially stuff coming from the States into Canada, where they regulate this industry differently. So we have to be careful. Just because it's done in a neighboring state, it doesn't mean that it's going to be legal once it crosses the border into Canada. So we have a different standard than they have, and for the most part, it's quite a bit higher.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. I would love to actually keep this going for another hour, but I suspect that we'd get in a lot of trouble. Thank you so much. Everybody, please stick around. We're going to move into the the Q&A side right away, and I'm sure that you've got them stacked up there. And I know that May, Karina, and John are happy to take them. So hold tight, and we'll move into Q&A right away. Thank you, guys.